Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host, coming to you live on a Monday evening with my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing tonight?
Doing very well. I didn't have to hear this national anthem that apparently is terrible, so I'm doing just fine. But maybe after the show, I'll listen to it and see what it's all about.
Yeah, I did not think that it was possible to top Fergie's from the NBA All-Star game a few years back, and apparently it was. So if you haven't seen the video, go try and find it after the episode. So
Yeah.
had a fun episode planned for you guys tonight. We were going to do some more training camp stuff, but we had to talk about some of these rankings that came out from Jeremy Fowler's annual survey over on ESPN. These rankings I think are always fun to give. It gives us some stuff to talk about. Over the last few weeks, we've kind of taken stock of where the Chargers roster is at, both from a bubble standpoint, from a star talent standpoint, and then these rankings come out, and it just kind of felt right to tie it back into some of the things that we've kind of discussed already. So it should be a fun one. I think the title says offense. I think we are going to talk a little bit about the defense. We'll see what time permits there, but if we can get to the Khalil Mack stuff, I definitely want to touch on it. But either way, if you miss these rankings, Jeremy Fowler does this survey of NFL coaches, scouts, executives, basically asking these people around the league to rank the top 10 players at every single position. So I believe there's only cornerback and wide receiver left, if I'm not mistaken. Every other position has been ranked. So we'll talk about some of those that the Chargers players have been featured on here in a minute. Before we get started, have to say, of course, rest in peace, Jacoby Jones, the former Chargers wide receiver / return man. Obviously, much more well-known for his success with the Ravens and the Super Bowl in particular run that they had. But obviously, a key free agent signing for the Chargers. Gone way too soon at 40. We don't really know any details, but the family did release that he passed away peacefully in his sleep. So well wishes to the Jones family, and hopefully everything was safe and sound there, but obviously sending some well wishes that way.
Yeah, bummer to hear. Unfortunately, didn't have a great Chargers career, so I can't say much about him as a Chargers player, but watching him as a Chargers fan, watching him on the Ravens, a couple of very legendary moments for them, including in the Super Bowl to beat Jim Harbaugh and the 49ers. So real bummer, of course. Kyrie Jackson we talked about a week ago. Just some guys gone too early. And again, there's never a great time, but it's unfortunate when they're always gone so soon. And I don't know much about Jacoby Jones, but to hear all the outpouring of support and love from just everybody instantly had a great story about him.
Yeah.
It was really, heartwarming to see all of that. Just really unfortunate. And unfortunate to hear.
Yeah, even J.J. Watt, who I didn't know Jacoby played on the Texans, honestly. J.J. Watt said he was one of his favorite teammates. So, it's just it's always sad when a player, who anybody that young passes away, obviously, but, sending well wishes their way. All right, so we're going to start with the offensive positions, as the title of the show says. First and foremost, Rashawn Slater is in the thumbnail, so we're going to start with the offensive tackle position. So as an aside, I think it's always really frustrating for me as an offensive line fan how the quarterbacks, the receivers, even like the interior defensive linemen these days get like 300 words written about them. Rashawn Slater got 52 words, and yes, I counted in his blurb. So it's really frustrating to see that little effort put into the offensive line rankings. But for anybody who missed it, the offensive tackle rankings are as follows. Number 1, Trent Williams. 2, Penei Sewell. 3, Laramie Tunsil. 4, Tristan Wirfs. 5, Lane Johnson. 6, Christian Darrisaw. 7 is Jordan Mailata. 8, Andrew Thomas. 9, Rashawn Slater. 10, Ronnie Stanley, which Jeremy Fowler did frame as a bit of a surprise. And then in the honorable mentions categories, you had Donovan Smith, who's currently a free agent. Deion Dawkins. Armstead. Who's Armstead?
Toronto.
Teron Armstead. Duh.
Yeah.
I was thinking Eric Armstead because I was just looking at the defensive tackle rankings. Colton Miller, Taylor Decker, Charles Cross, and then in the receiving votes category, you had Spencer Brown, Darnell Wright, Orlando Brown Jr., Jake Matthews, Paris Johnson, Ryan Ramczyk, who might not even play this year, Titus Howard, Taylor Moton, Garrett Bowles, and then Bernard Raymond was the last one there. So Tyler, I guess we can talk about some of the other players. We can talk about Rashawn, where he stands up. I'll give the floor to you. Kind of where did your mind go first when reading this list?
Well, I always look for the Chargers player, right? But I think because of Rashawn and what class he was drafted, and I do look at that class and how they're doing. Mm-hmm. And again, I've said it many times. I was so spoiled because it's like Sewell's good, Slater's good, Darrisaw's good. Offensive line evaluation is super easy, and there they are on the 3 of them on the list, no problem. The first runners I had the next year are not even in the honorable mention categories, I don't think.
No.
So yeah, Penei Sewell at 2 is awesome. He's as talented as he was projected to be and expected to be. And while I don't think Joe Alt was ever that prospect, it is nice to see, a few years ago, a player, very talented player, picked in the top 10, switch from left to right, struggle, then find his way and become a great NFL tackle. Now, again, I do not think Penei Sewell is Joe Alt, but some people do believe Joe Alt was the next best guy since Penei Sewell. And so it is good to see that ahead of Joe Alt's first season. And we can look at Penei Sewell's first season. Penei Sewell, who might be the best player I'll ever grade, and he struggled, but he still figured it out. And I think hopefully Joe Alt feels the same way or can do the same thing. Darrisaw being in there, great. I'm a little surprised. I didn't realize there was such a discussion around him as a top 10 guy in the league. I don't remember if Brandon Thorne in his exercise even had him drafted. I could be wrong, but I don't recall. Slater definitely was. Sewell obviously was. But then we get to Rashawn Slater. I don't think his placement is terrible. I disagree on what his potential could be. You and I feel that he's maybe the best player on the Chargers period this year if he's healthy. But I understand why he wouldn't be higher. And it's tough when you have one season that was cut short, basically non-existent due to a bicep injury. Then you play with 2 high ankle sprains. You're not yourself. So you're not that great tackle we all kind of expected. And maybe watching his peak so early, people just feel like there's a bit of a decline since then. Half true, but mostly just injury related. The issue I have is really the discussion around Rashawn Slater, not even the placement. It's the discussion around Rashawn Slater. And in particular, 2 things. One is that the Chargers should have taken Christian Darrisaw. Now, Darrisaw doing great is great for my priors. Awesome. OT3, first round grade, great. I'm glad he's doing well.
He's who the guy we wanted him because we thought that Rashawn was not going to be available.
Yeah, or we thought they wouldn't fit the metric threshold. Like we thought Darrisaw was going to be the pick.
Yeah.
And if he was, it would have been, I think, just fine. But this sudden change and shift in like, oh, we should have taken Darrisaw is such a surprise to me because Darrisaw was struggled to be healthy to start. And yes, he's turned out into a fine offensive tackle. I think he did a very nice job against the Chargers when they played him this past year. But I'm not taking him over Rashawn Slater in a redraft. And the other one, probably more irritating than anything, is the whole, well, we should have just made Slater a guard this whole time because people thought he should have been a very good guard. Like, do you know how hard it is to find someone who can even contend and be there consistently for All-Pro, second-team All-Pro, let alone as a rookie, achieve that feat? It is so difficult to find that at left tackle. He is that. And there's the discussion because of an ESPN ranking that maybe they should have just made him a guard this whole time. Why? And frankly, I don't think that solves a problem. That just creates a left tackle problem. And did you expect the Chargers to just like get another tackle and make that work? The whole discussion around Rashawn Slater, specifically, not even related to the ranking, is just really frustrating. And I hope he has a great season so people remember just how great he is, because it's frustrating to see a strange pivot in how people are feeling about Rashawn Slater because he tore his bicep. And by the way, tried to make it back into the postseason for your team and for Justin Herbert and for his teammates. And then last year played on a double high ankle sprain, both of his legs. Like last time I checked, you only have 2 legs. and he played through that. You know, I got hurt playing against like dorky 18 to 22-year-olds at UCI in intramural flag football. I hurt my knee doing that. You know what I got to do? Just not lift and not do anything for a few weeks and ice it up. He had to go out there and block Max Crosby and all these guys.
Yeah.
And we're giving him, and by the way, his season wasn't even that bad. He had 2 awful injuries that he don't think he even talked about. Like, he wasn't even on the injury report for these things specifically. There was no like actual report, I think, until Duke Manyweather said anything.
Yeah.
So it's just the whole thing's frustrating. We should appreciate him more. We do. You and I do. And I think a lot of Chargers fans really do. But this whole pivot and discussion around him, I hate it. It really bugs me.
Yeah, the discussion being this way from like a national perspective, as you and Kevin point out, that the high ankle sprain is not common knowledge. Like, it's not something that anybody really addressed outside of Duke, like tweeting it a couple of times out. Like, if Duke had not tweeted about it, we would not have really known about it. I think his first ankle injury was on the injury report for like a couple of weeks, but he didn't miss any practices. There was never any doubt that he was going to play because that's just who Rashawn is. I think, you know, he spoke about this after the season, you know, when he tore his bicep and literally could not play. It was just the toughest thing possible for him. And so he kind of said to himself, like, if anything minor happens, like, I'm just playing through it. And there were like a couple of games where you saw it, but for the most part, you know, he was still out there playing through these things, playing really hard. And yeah, so that's part of it. Regarding the Brandon Thorn draft, again, if you missed this, so him, Andrew Whitworth, and Jeff Schwartz did an offensive line draft for the next 3 seasons. They each drafted a top 5, and then they each had 1 pick of a player 25 or younger. I don't remember what the order was or like the stipulations, but Andrew Whitworth drafted Trent Williams, Penei Sewell to be his starting tackle duo, and he took Christian Darrisaw as his 25 or younger. Jeff Schwartz took Slater, Tristan Wirfs, and Darnell Wright as his 25 or younger. And then Brandon Thorn took Laramie Tunsil, Lane Johnson, and Joe Alt as his 25 or younger. So both Chargers tackles represented in that specific list. So just for what it's worth. Yeah, the Rashawn Slater stuff to me from a fan base perspective is a little frustrating because I see on Facebook like people saying that they shouldn't pay him and they should just let him walk. And then when he's a free agent, Joe can switch to the left side and then they'll just draft another right tackle, or Jamari can play right tackle at that point in time, even though Jamari will be off his rookie contract before Rashawn Slater because of the 5th-year option stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So the fan narratives to me are really surprising. Like, this is a guy who was a second-team All-Pro as a rookie, and this past season coming off of the injuries was still one of the 5 or 6 best offensive tackles in the league. So the narratives from an outside perspective, I can understand, you know, to a certain extent, because the health was not so publicly discussed. The Chargers were bad. The run game was bad. Like, just like natural association, you're probably like, oh, like their best offensive lineman probably had a down year. But within the fan base, like, you would expect a little bit more nuance to that conversation, especially because we all go to bat for Justin Herbert. Like, every single person within this fan base goes to bat for Justin Herbert. We all did it for Keenan Allen for years. You know, when a player is that level of caliber, the fan base generally is like, this is our guy. But with Rashawn, it hasn't really gotten to that point where everybody within the fan base has their arms around him yet. So it's puzzling for sure when I see stuff like that on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Reddit. You know, this is a guy who we unquestionably ranked as a potential top 3 player at his position. And this list does not, you know, reflect that. He is ranked as the 6th left tackle at his position in this list. But I think there's some nuance to this. So it's like, we need the fan base. I think this is kind of a rallying cry for a Rashawn Slater appreciation movement from the fan base. And again, there's a lot of people like us. I'm sure most of you listening to this podcast agree with us, I'm sure. But you know, tell your friends. Let's wrap our arms a little bit more about Rashawn Slater. He was at Offensive Line Masterminds, you know, taking a stronger vocal approach, I expect him to be a team captain this year. I expect him to stay healthy this year and just have an awesome season. But let's not wait for him to play awesome to appreciate his greatness right now and who he is heading into his fourth season.
Yeah, I just can't imagine you going on Facebook and Reddit and reading those comments. So God bless you for getting through all that.
People send me stuff all the time, especially in our Discord. We get stuff thrown around there all the time, and especially like offensive line stuff. They'll be like, "Steven, did you see this?" I'll get like 7 people showing me the same screenshot from Facebook about Rashawn just because they just know, that I will go to bat for our guy. So people send me stuff. I try and avoid Facebook and Reddit like as much as I possibly can. Otherwise, if people were not sending me stuff, I would not be on there.
Yeah, I get you. I'm glad you brought up the Joe Alt conversation because I forgot about that too. This idea that, we'll just have Joe Alt switch back after he's figured out right tackle and dealt with Mike Crosby. Like, we'll just put him back at left tackle. It's like, guys, it's not quite the same thing, but I think we've watched this be the detriment to Zion Johnson's career to start in the NFL.
Yeah.
Having to switch back and forth. Like, let's not do that again.
Yeah.
And once again, like, please listen to Duke Manyweather and these guys who say you should not be changing positions or switching sides like this so frequently. They don't like it really at all.
Yeah.
If you have to, you do it once and you call it a day.
Yeah.
And hopefully you can stick there. So very frustrating. Yeah. Not Zion Johnson, Rashawn Slater, someone who's at offensive line masterminds and speaking and teaching all these tackles and offensive linemen about how to play and the nuance in his stance and et cetera,
yeah.
and how he's learned different things that are better than what might be a bit more outdated or not as practical. And everyone's just like, we just not pay him. Like, that's the person you don't want to pay. I don't quite get it. Like, frankly, if that's how you feel about Rashawn Slater, and this is not quite the same thing, but bear with me, that's the way you feel about Rashawn Slater, you should almost feel the same way about Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
He's one of the best players at his position and ranked higher in this list. He's been a warrior. He's outstanding, high character, but he hasn't quite hit his, potential in each season. Not necessarily all his fault, but there's been injuries that have prevented him from doing what we all expect him to do, which he did in his rookie season and early part of his career. So if that's how you feel about Slater, who's an all-pro potential guy, then feel that way about Herbert. And if that sounds stupid, then don't feel that way about Slater.
If that sounds stupid, it's because it is.
Because it is. You're welcome.
Like the whole switching positions, I just think like you look at this list, right, and you see several different examples of guys who have, maybe been given the chance to switch positions and their teams have done that or not done that. I mean, look at Lane Johnson and his career being, late into or in the middle of his 30s, and he's had this illustrious career. He's all pro like basically every season. He's like the unquestioned best right tackle in the league for like 5 straight years. And look at like the cast of characters the Eagles have had at left tackle over the years. It took them a really, really long time to find Jordan Mailata, who is on this list, before they found like a really reliable starter. And Jordan Mailata was like an international pathways player. Like, they had to look into every nook and cranny to find that guy. And if the fans had their way, I'm sure they would have just switched Lane Johnson over to left tackle like 17 times in Philadelphia at this point, because you kind of, triple the craziness for Philly fans, of course. But the Eagles stayed patient. They kept him at right tackle, and he's been, the best right tackle of his generation. And, certainly now there's dealing with some injuries and things like that. But, switching players is not as easy, or switching positions for these players is just not as easy as people make it out to be. And you want them to find a home and be able to stick at that specific position, and just kind of grow from there. So last thing here, I did want to bring up some of the numbers from Slater compared to the players kind of around him. Christian Darrisaw at 6 was a big surprise to me, because like you mentioned, he's come into his own. He's a really good player, but him being a top 6 offensive tackle, I did not really see just kind of, ranking into this season. So again, pass blocking grade, we've talked about this before. It's different for everybody how you view it, but Christian Darrisaw's pass blocking grade from this past season was 85.3. Rashawn's was 84.7, again, doing the injury thing. Their pass blocking efficiency rating was very, very similar. Darrisaw's was 97 even. Slater's was 97.1. Slater did allow more pressures total, but the Chargers passed like 200 more times than the Minnesota Vikings did. The big difference there is pass blocking efficiency rating for Slater in true pass sets versus Darrisaw in true pass sets and Mailata. I think that's really where Rashawn can shine and say, hey, like this is my differentiating factor. So Rashawn actually had the 5th highest pass blocking efficiency rating in true pass sets, which is what PFF describes as a true like one-on-one you against me kind of situation. Darrisaw was 16th and Mailata was actually like 20th. So Slater has an edge in true pass blocking sets, and I do think that is worth bringing up. ESPN cited pass block win rate only for Slater and like a few other guys. They didn't say like this is where he ranked or things like that. But it did seem like based off of the blurb that Rashawn's ESPN pass block win rate was pretty high as well.
No, I didn't realize that Rashawn Slater's true pass set PBE was that good, and especially relative to the guys around him. So that's an impressive stat to bring up.
Yeah. Last thing with the offensive tackles, Ronnie Stanley at 10. Like, what are we doing here? This man, like, respect for playing through injuries and things like that. He once was one of the best left tackles in the league. But this is a guy who finished next to Trevor Penning and Anton Harrison in pass blocking efficiency rating. This is a guy who just like was not even finishing full games at the end of the last season. So, respect obviously for what he's been able to accomplish, but when you're next to Trevor Penning, Jerron Christian, who's a backup, Darnell Wright, and Anton Harrison, you're not in the conversation, like even close to being one of the 10 best offensive tackles in the league. So I much would have preferred to see Deion Dawkins in this conversation, Teron Armstead, even with his injury, Colton Miller. Colton Miller, as much as I don't want to give a Raider praise, Colton Miller might be one of the most underrated players in the NFL at this point in time. So any one of those guys I would have seen over Ronnie Stanley. That one just, I did not like that at this point in time. That's just like, let's pick the next first round pick that we know. And it just, I did not like that one at all.
Yeah, I don't even think Ravens fans would have put him top 10.
They all. I follow like 4 Ravens podcasters, and they're like, "What the hell? This is stupid."
Yeah, I mean, but like you said, the effort put into some of the excerpts about offensive line, offensive tackle. I don't know how many people are really evaluating all these guys at a technical and film level. So, whatever. Maybe they're just placeholder. Let's call that number 10 with Ronnie Stanley is just a placeholder for another Notre Dame offensive tackle next year.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what happens with Joe Alt, but there were some rookies who did make the list at their respective positions. I think an offensive tackle, it is, right for the taking for Joe if he is able to have a great season. Again, I think fans should be a little bit more patient. Not everybody is Rashawn Slater, as we have discussed. But you look at the right tackles who are on this list. Obviously, you have Penei Sewell and Lane Johnson, but outside of that, it's really kind of up for grabs who is that third, right tackle to make their claim, especially after Tristan Wirfs switched positions. But on this list, the third right tackle is actually Spencer Brown from the Bills, who I would describe as like a league average tackle. And then you have Darnell Wright made the list. Orlando Brown Jr. made the list. I mentioned Ryan Ramczyk, who might retire. Titus Howard has played more guard than right tackle. And that's it for the right tackles. So there's a real opportunity similar to Junior Colson, where there's just not a ton of like established high-end talent. So if Joe Alt comes in and just has an awesome rookie season, which I do think is on the table, then there is a chance we see him at least make, receiving votes category at this time next year.
Yeah, and that'd be fantastic. Top 10 would be difficult to crack.
Yeah.
We'll see how some of these 2022, 2023 draft picks step up their game, if at all. But yeah, receiving votes would be great. That'd be awesome. Honorable mention would be fantastic.
Yeah. And that would be an amazing season for me. Like, I think people are really underestimating how much of a transition this is going to be for Joe. But I do think he can have a good rookie season. And if he has a good enough rookie season and the Chargers win games, he has a good stand-up performance against Max Crosby one time. Like, that's the kind of stuff you need to get on that list as a rookie. All right, let's get to quarterbacks here. This is maybe a more interesting discussion, although we did just spend 20 minutes on offensive tackle, which I love, of course. But quarterbacks, you obviously have Patrick Mahomes at number 1. Then you have Joe Burrow comes in at 2nd, which I thought was a bit of a surprise. Josh Allen at 3, Lamar Jackson at 4, Matthew Stafford at 5, Justin Herbert at 6, CJ Stroud at 7, Aaron Rodgers at 8, Jared Goff 9th, and Dak Prescott rounding out the top 10. Honorable mentions, you have Brock Purdy, Jordan Love, Jalen Hurts, Tua Tagovailoa, Kirk Cousins, Trevor Lawrence, and then also received votes Baker Mayfield and Kyler Murray. So not a ton of received votes for the quarterbacks because they have a lot of other ones here. Justin Herbert was 5th last season. He drops 1 spot in this list. What are your thoughts about that, Tyler?
It's boring, but it is kind of fair. Like, that's my answer, is it seems kind of fair given, we were hoping that, of course, that he would punch back into that top 3. But he didn't finish the season. It was statistically a down season in the 13 games he started and finished. Overall, I'm not saying it's all his fault, but the dropback EPA was, I think, 11th, and the success rate was, I think, 15th. Great for those first 3 weeks, right? Especially that third game in particular, which is one of the best games of quarterback play I've seen. But it wasn't a great year, and he didn't finish the season. He missed 4.5 games. So I think 6 is pretty solid, for a guy who, didn't do that well last season. There were injuries around him. The team was terrible, and he got hurt. So I think 6 is totally fine. I don't really have a huge issue with the placement. I hope he can only just go up from there. I think he can, but I'm curious how far he can punch up into maybe the top 3 with Greg Roman, with Jim Harbaugh, because if everyone believes that it's a wins thing, and they did cite his record in the ESPN article, if it's about wins, then sure, he could jump into the top 3. But if it's about raw numbers and getting 5,000 yards and 40 to 50 touchdowns, I don't know that he's going to do that. He might. I'm not going to say definitively that they're just flat out going to run the ball all the time, but we'll see. It remains to be seen. Will he be able to get those stats, or is he just in a very solid, and it sounds like an ass comparison, but like the way they asked Ryan Tannehill and that kind of offense to operate, where he's going to get 4,000 yards, 30-something touchdowns, really good seasons, but doesn't quite get into that upper echelon. So I'm curious how much higher he can go. The only one that really puzzled me was Joe Burrow. I was surprised that they had him 2nd. Of course, Joe Burrow has a ton of love around the league. He's a good quarterback, has had great moments, but he didn't finish the season. Didn't have a great year as is. I don't know how he was to start. But
Very bad, because he had that calf injury and he could barely move. Right.
So 2,300 yards, 15 touchdowns from weeks 1 to 11. 2nd? That's a surprise to me. I think Josh Allen deserves to be 2nd place. And I know you feel very strongly about Josh Allen in his own particular tier.
Yeah, I outside of the Herbert stuff, I was generally surprised at how more nuanced to the situation the quarterback rankings were compared to the other positions. Maybe they were, and we just didn't get the all of the blurbs that people said about these positions. But Joe Burrow staying at 2 despite his injuries, Aaron Rodgers at 8 despite his injuries and everything like that. And Justin, frankly, when I knew that these were coming out, I kind of expected Justin Herbert to fall a few spots, because the rib injury, the 2 fingers, it's been, some obviously poor seasons for the Chargers over the last couple of seasons. He hasn't been able to play as well for those reasons as he did in 2021. So I was kind of expecting him to place 9th on this list, just based off of how general quarterback discourse is. So I guess good on the NFL executives for being a little bit more nuanced with quarterback discourse. But it didn't show up in other positions, which is always fun. But I was fully expecting CJ Stroud to be 4th on the list because of what he was doing, recency bias and all that stuff. So pleasant surprise there. With the Justin Herbert conversation, one thing the executives did bring up is that they believe that Jim Harbaugh will kind of right the ship of his career. And I think, one thing that was pointed out is that this is going to be his 4th offensive coordinator in the NFL. And presumably that number is going to stay the same for a little bit here. I cannot imagine Greg Roman has enough stock in the league to become a head coach in the next little bit here. So I think there is part of that where the executives kind of feel that this is going to be his coaching duo for the next few years, and that's going to maybe kind of stabilize Justin Herbert's career. Not that it did need stabilizing, obviously, but just from a coaching standpoint, these are going to be his guys. And so it does sound like there's a lot of faith being placed in Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman to, help Justin get him back to his 2021 heights where he was truly like one of the three best quarterbacks, like unquestionably so at that time in the season. Now there's a lot more debate. Obviously there's more guys, but it does sound like there's a lot of faith being placed in this coaching regime.
Yeah, but not much in the talent around him. We just talked about tackle. They had one at 9th. They had no interior offensive linemen, no tight ends either made the list, received votes, or were honorable mentions. Same with running backs. Same with running backs. And I'm going to assume same with wide receivers. I can't imagine Josh Palmer is going to get a receiving votes thing in there. Keenan Allen might, Mike Williams might, but Josh Palmer not so much. So it's interesting to see that Herbert 6th, and yet there's no one on his team right now that is even cracking the list outside of Rashawn Slater at 9th. So we'll see how the season goes.
Yeah, I am curious to see from a quarterback discourse perspective. You have Brock Purdy in the honorable mentions category. Same with Jordan Love. Those two feel like surefire bets to jump into the top 10 at this time next year. Again, these national narratives and NFL narratives love people like Brock Purdy. Like, to me, Brock Purdy being the 11th best quarterback in the league is just like not even accurate at all based off of like the skill sets and talents and things like that. But, if the 49ers make another deep playoff run, Brock Purdy is going to be in the top 10. And if Jordan Love and the Packers make a deep playoff run, Love's probably going to be in the top 10. So it seems pretty nuanced right now from the league, but at this time next year, if the Chargers go 9-8, like, where does the league view Herbert at that point if these other teams make deep playoff runs again and Herbert misses, for no fault of his own, obviously misses the playoffs again. So I am curious what this will look like next year for Justin Herbert's sake. And obviously I hope he's much higher because I think he deserves to be much higher on this list. But, these narratives, they love to choose those wins and losses and playoff records and big moments and things like that. So his stock next year is going to be more interesting, I think, than this year's.
As far as, and I can't believe I'm talking about this, blocking tight ends goes. So I'm looking at the receiving votes and I'm looking at the honorable mentions. So I'm thinking Ferguson, McBride, Freiermuth, Kmet, Pitts, Fant, Musgrave, Knox, Higbee, Henry.
Yeah, this is basically a receiving tight end list.
That was what I was getting at. Where's the blocking tight end in here? Because what did Musgrave even have last year? 250?
Yeah, Luke Musgrave receiving votes is kind of crazy. He missed like 7 games last year.
Yeah, and was a rookie. Congrats to your guy Dalton Kincaid and Sam Laporta for making it.
Yeah,
and all the other tight ends who made it from the previous year's draft that the Chargers could have had. Anyway, I hope Will Dissly makes it next year because I think he can catch some more passes and get into that category.
Yeah. From a tight end perspective, it's kind of sad looking at that list and thinking at the drop off in talent is like so steep. Like I love that Dalton Kincaid made this list at number 8. The tackle equivalent of him is probably like Darnell Wright, who's like in the receiving votes. The quarterback version of him is probably not making the top 10. He's probably in the receiving votes category. So again, don't get me wrong, I love to see Utah legend Dalton Kincaid on there, but Noah Fant, it received votes. Like, who on earth is like Noah Fant was the 3rd best tight end on his own team last year? Like, what are we doing here? So, Will Dissly, I think if you polled NFL executives exclusively on like who's the best blocking tight end, obviously Will Dissly is going to make that list. But the only like true blocker on this list is probably George Kittle. I mean, David Njoku's become a really good blocker, but he's not anywhere close to George Kittle. So, it's not a blocking list at all. It is very clearly a pass catcher tight end list.
Yeah, so maybe Hayden Hurst then next year or both.
Or both.
Yeah.
Or Colson Loveland in 2026.
There you go. There you go. Now we're cooking.
So, like Tyler mentioned, no interior offensive linemen make the list for the Chargers. No running backs make the list. No tight ends. So yeah, a little different than what we're used to as Chargers fans, where Mike Williams, Keenan Allen, Austin Eckler at least would receive votes. Corey Linsley obviously dominated this list last year for interior offensive linemen. So Justin Herbert, Rashawn, Slater holding down the fort for the Chargers in the positional rankings in 2024.
Yeah.
All right. Should we touch on some defensive stuff?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it.
Before we get to that point, obviously I have to tell you guys about our friends over at Prize Picks. Some great things coming your way. NBA Summer League is about to start here in a few weeks. The WNBA season is running rampant. Obviously, we got the Olympics coming up. It's a great time to get into Prize Picks. We're right around the corner from the NFL season as well. So Prize Picks guarantees you a deposit match up to $100 your first time around using the code GUILTY at checkout. Again, that is GUILTY at checkout at prizepicks.com. It is the best and easiest way to consume daily fantasy sports. Tyler's mom has obviously made a nice little penny from Prize Picks, and hopefully you guys have as well. If you're not taking advantage of this, please go and do so. It does help support the show as well as your own wallet. So again, that is prizepicks.com/guilty, code GUILTY at checkout for a deposit match up to $100. All right, let's get to the defense side of things here. Again, cornerback has not been released, but obviously the big one for the Chargers is the edge rushers. It's the best position on the team. And I would argue, obviously, the best defensive player on the team, Khalil Mack, is an edge rusher. So, unfortunately, Khalil Mack gets snubbed on the edge rusher list. So, ranking-wise, you have Myles Garrett, T.J. Watt, Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Max Crosby at 5, Aiden Hutchinson at number 6, Danielle Hunter, who is with the Houston Texans now, at number 7, Josh Hines Allen, formerly Josh Allen, at number 8, Trey Hendrickson at 9, Brian Burns, the new New York Giant, at 10, one spot ahead of Khalil Mack, who was the first honorable mention, followed by Rashawn Gary, Jalen Phillips, Montez Sweat, and Will Anderson. Also receiving votes, you have Joey Bosa, Grenard on the Vikings, I forget his first name, Matthew Judon, Kayvon Thibodeau, Alex Highsmith, Bradley Chubb, Jadeveon Clowney, Trayvon Walker, and Josh Sweat rounds out the list.
Yeah, so I just assumed that Khalil Mack made this list because I figured if you have 88 pressures and 18 sacks, or the article quotes 17 sacks, regardless, I figure that's enough to get you into the top 10. Maybe like 9th or 10th is cool. Honorable mentions feels pretty disrespectful, and even maybe more so just a reflection of the defense as a whole, and the idea that, well, Brandon Staley's defense was bad and no one was good on that defense, apparently. Khalil Mack was pretty good. And as much as I love what he did as a pass rusher, I was almost as impressed, if not more, as a run defender.
Yeah.
So all the raw stats, per play stats, everything in big moments or when the season was shit, everything that he was able to do, it was phenomenal. And as I can't imagine having him off the top 10. I totally get that the edge rusher group is getting very strong and has some really good mainstays. Let's say like within the top 5 or 6. Those guys are set. I get it. I didn't think Mack would be in the top 3 by any means, but off the list entirely just is plain wrong. And I'm curious if he got any votes in the top 10. He's the first honorable mention listed, so I guess 11th isn't terrible, but having him off the top 10 altogether after the season he just had just feels disrespectful. It's the worst rank of the 3 players we've discussed. It's by far the worst ranking.
Yeah, so the poll, I believe, is sent out as fill in your top 10 at this position, and then they kind of sort based off of points, who is where. So Khalil Mack is like he's getting votes in the top 10. I think his highest ranking was 5th, if I'm not mistaken. If anybody has that correctly, feel free and say so. But yeah, obviously lots of 5th or lower. He was unranked. That was his lowest ranking. But to me, it's like, if you're going to punish him for being on a bad team, why is Trey Hendrickson on this list? Why is Josh Hines Allen on this list? Danielle Hunter made the list and the Vikings were bad. Brian Burns was on the Panthers and they were literally the worst team in football. Like, I don't understand. Again, he didn't get much of a blurb. It was like, oh, like he can have another great season next year with the right defense. It's like, okay, what kind of blurb is this? But it's just to me, it's a lack of like actually, these NFL executives, I'm sure, probably looked at sacks. They probably looked at pressures. But it's everything else that Khalil Mack did in 2023. And we've talked a lot about him. But to me, if you're talking about like pass rush and run defense, it's Max Crosby, number one, I would say probably in his own tier. And then it's Khalil after last season. Khalil was right there neck and neck with him in run stops all the way to the very end of the season. This is a guy who is one of the most dominant run defenders in his position over the last decade. Like, this is a guy who has that reputation of run defense. And for them to not even mention it was pretty disappointing. So I understand like there's flashier guys and, and I don't think Khalil's top 5 at this point in time. Like, I think you look at that top 5, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt, Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Max Crosby. I have no issue with him not being ahead of those guys. But even Aiden Hutchinson had like 12 run stops last year. Khalil Mack had 12 run stops in like the first 4 games. Like, it's just like he's in that much of a different universe right now as a run defender. He had more pressures and more sacks than Aiden Hutchinson did. He had more sacks and pressures than Josh Hines-Allen did. He had more sacks and pressures than Trey Hendrickson did. He had more sacks and pressures than Brian Burns did. And he's a better run defender than all of them. So it's just, that one was definitely the most frustrating because, like I mentioned, I kind of expected Justin to get a little slighted. Rashawn Slater being 8th, it's not ideal, but it's top 8, which is respectable. Khalil not being in the top 10 is really frustrating to me, just because it shows a lack of respect for truly what he did last season, because the team was bad, and then you're not having the same kind of conversation about the other players who are also on bad teams. Like, it's just, that one was frustrating to me. That one was like, okay, what the hell is going on here? Because this guy was easily one of the 4 or 5 best edge rushers last year. Again, you're ranking players based off of like upcoming year too. So I don't have an issue with him not being top 5, but not making the top 10, to me, that's just really disrespectful.
Yeah, it is. He had more pressures than Brian Burns had pressures and stops combined. Brian Burns had 40 pressures and 9 sacks last year, and 32 run stops. And I don't see how you could put that ahead of Khalil
Good
Mack.
player, but
sure, totally. Several good players, and Hendrickson, Hunter, these guys had really good stats. But Burns, like 40 pressures shouldn't get you in the top 10, man. And it's not like he has a multi-year history of 90 to 100 pressures to go off of.
Right.
40 pressures. I mean, sorry, man. That ain't above Khalil Mack to me.
No, I look at this list and Khalil Mack's name sticks out like a sore thumb to me. Like, it just looks like something that does not belong in that conversation. Like, seeing his name next to Rashawn Gary, Jalen Phillips, who played 9 games, Montez Sweat, who was good for the Bears but really bad for the Commanders, and Will Anderson, who was a rookie and like barely better than Thule, like as a rookie. It really sticks out like a sore thumb to me. And so, obviously Matthew pointing out, like, record matters here, and I understand that, but let's make it matter for everywhere. If you're going to single out Khalil Mack for that just doesn't make sense to me. So this, and it's the last thing that's frustrating to me is, like, I kind of know that his numbers are not super, repeatable to next year, because I think he's going to play less. So if he has 13 sacks and 75 pressures or 70 pressures, then people are going to be like, oh, like he's starting to be washed. And it's like, no, he's just playing less. Like, we need to watch the tape here. So to me, Khalil Mack he's a guy who should be respected more than he has been so far, just based off of like the way national media and NFL executives are talking about him.
Yeah, I agree. And I wish he were talked about, or at least ranked respectfully with respect to the kind of person he is too. I don't quite get it. I'm bummed because, like you said, unlikely to have 90 pressures and 20 sacks next season. So does he just always stay outside of the top 10, regardless of, pretty solid performances? I almost feel that if Joey has a resurgent season that maybe is the same as what Mack just had, they just put Joey ahead of him, because it's the new thing and the buzzy thing. It's the comeback story. maybe they do that.
Yeah, and you have Will Anderson, who's obviously considered a rising rookie. Alex Highsmith's on the rise. Trayvon Walker's a former number 1 pick, which him receiving votes too is just like what? Like somebody in the NFL actually thinks Trayvon Walker is a top 10 edge rusher. Like, what are we doing? He's probably the Jaguars executive.
I was going to say it's right.
Yeah. So yeah, I think the fan base has embraced Khalil. That's not here, but like national media, like let's wrap our arms around this guy a bit more. Joey, obviously a bit of a different story. He's in the receiving votes category. So, I went back and looked at it, and at this time last year, he was actually in the top 10 ahead of Khalil Mack. Khalil Mack, his position actually did not change. So he was 11th last year, 11th this year. And Joey went from, I think it was 7th to receiving votes. Joey, I don't know how much he's going to be able to improve. I think if he stays healthy, he can get into the top 10, maybe in the top 8. But I think Joey's reputation, just with his injuries, I think might be a little too far gone for him to, be higher than some of these other guys.
I lost you on that last part. What'd you say? I guess sorry, I don't know if my internet was.
Oh, maybe my internet's bad. I don't know. But I just think Joey, his injury history might deter him a little bit more next year, even if he does have a resurgent season.
Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah, if Mack can't crack the top 10, I don't know. These lists could be partially emotional. They could be, whatever. Like, oh my gosh, look at this.
Draft priors are probably
whatever. They still respected Joey Bosa in the top 10 last year, even though he had some issues as well and had an injury history. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't think he cracks the top 10.
Yeah, but rooting for it, obviously, because if that happens, then both of those guys in the top 10 means the Chargers would have a great season. Again, nothing at linebacker, nothing at interior defensive line for the Chargers, but at safety, Derwin James did crack the top 10. He was actually 2nd last year in the list. He falls to number 7 this year. I forgot to write down the list, so let me find it real quickly. I
can read it off if you're ready.
You have it? Okay. Go ahead.
So number 1, Antoine Winfield Jr. Number 2, Kyle Hamilton. Number 3, Jesse Bates. Number 4, Minkah Fitzpatrick. Number 5, Javon Holland. Number 6, Budda Baker. Number 7, Derwin James. 8 is Kyle Duggar. 9, Talanoa Hufanga. Or I don't know if that's how you say it exactly.
Talanoa.
Close enough.
You're good. Yeah, you're good.
Yeah. Number 10, Xavier McKinney. And then if you want to go with honorable mentions, Justin Simmons, Jalen Petre, Justin Reed, Marcus Williams, CJ Gardner-Johnson, Brian Branch, and Andre Sisco. Receiving votes, Grant Delpit, Trayvon Merrick, Efiatu Melifonwu, Jaquan Brisker, Donovan Wilson, Alohi Gilman, Geno Stone, Jabril Peppers, and that's it for receiving votes. I didn't see that Alohi made receiving votes previously, so I'm actually very happy with that.
Yeah, I think that's a good shout out for somebody who could potentially be in for a real breakout season this year. We kind of went out, we did a bold prediction show, so we think that he finishes in the top 10 next year. Jim Harbaugh, I think, also agrees with that. So I'm excited to see what Alohi can do with this defense. I think he'll be featured a little bit more. I think part of his lack of perception is that they didn't really have any other free safety, and so they would just have to play him at free safety and say, hey, go cover the deep middle part of the field. And he can do that, but I think his role this year is going to be a bit more playmaking designed. And so I'm excited to see him get some shine for this time next year.
Yeah, that's going to be a big draft priors. Is he on a good defense this year kind of thing? I think everything that's prevented him from getting national spotlight and even, frankly, maybe even a bigger contract is going to hold him back. I could see Brian Branch jumping up.
For sure.
Jalen Petre seems like he's primed too. Simmons is a free agent, so I have no idea, but he could jump up. But I would love to see Gilman at least get into honorable mention, because that would be if he gets into honorable mentions, the Chargers definitively have the best safety duo in the league, assuming Derwin James still sticks in that top 10. That's a great one too. But good for Gilman. I did not realize he got receiving votes, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. For those of you who might be a little surprised at like the Jesse Bates ranking, I don't think you should be. So Jesse Bates, according to ESPN, ranked 20, or he had a ball hawk rate of 28.2%, which is third overall among safeties, and he had 6 interceptions, and he
Yeah,
was
I think 5
6th in
forced
last
fumbles
year's
too.
ranking, 6 in the year before that. You said 5 forced fumbles.
Yeah, I believe.
So he also had 132 tackles. Like Jesse Bates was awesome last season for the
Mhm.
Falcons, and he was really good for the Bengals. And I think you see the lack of Jesse Bates effect in Cincinnati. So do I think he's better than Minka Fitzpatrick, who finished 4th? Probably not. But I think he deserves to make the top 5. And then Javon Holland, who apparently is really good friends with Derwin James, or at least workout buddies. They're kind of training together right now. Finishing at 5th is cool for draft priors. I liked Javon Holland quite a bit. He's kind of like a mini Derwin James in terms of
Mm.
role and things like that. So Derwin at 7, we both believe that there's a rebound season for Derwin incoming in 2024. And it sounds like the executives do kind of agree with that. So
Yeah.
they did, kind of highlight that it was a down year. The system did him no favors, but he did finish with 125 tackles. Didn't have a ton of support around him. But you bet on the traits and the ability in a new system that he can remain a top guy. So I think executives, similar to some of the other positions, maybe projecting, similar to the Justin Herbert conversation, seeing that Jim Harbaugh, Jesse Minter are probably going to get the most out of Derwin James in 2024.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. How high could he crack next year? I don't know. That the league just loves Derwin James, and he's still on. Like he
Yeah.
was worse than many at his position, at his job, than a lot of Chargers players who, well, whether they're still Chargers or not, are going to be ranked on these lists. So, but he has the highest ranking of 4th, the lowest ranking of unranked. I think he can punch up a bit higher, get into that top 5 again, which is pretty fair. Now that Kyle Hamilton, Holland they've entered the conversation, and Winfield Jr. for that matter entered the conversation as good safeties. A little tougher for him, where it used to just kind of be Derwin, Fitzpatrick, and like a 3rd or 4th guy. There's a few more guys now, and we'll see what Brian Branch does. But yeah, top 5 next year, I think we'd be pretty solid. I think the ESPN, I don't know if it got it right. It's the right way to say it, but it feels like 7 feels okay.
Yeah, 7 feels okay to me, because you kind of have to project into next year, balancing like previous years, statistics and things that he did last year. So I think it is very doable for him to move up a few spots, but I don't think he's moving into the top 3. Like he might, like 3 might be his ceiling, but I kind of just tend to think that Kyle Hamilton should be like unquestionably number 1. Like to me,
Yeah,
Kyle Hamilton is like in a similar like tier conversation of like Mahomes at number 1 and like Chris Jones at his position. Like to me, Kyle Hamilton should like unquestionably be the best safety in the league. Like no one else should touch it. Like that's just my opinion at this point in time. But I do think he could catch Antoine Winfield. I think he could catch Minka. I think he could catch Jesse Bates. But I think some of those guys will finish ahead of him. So it's just, can he get back into the top 5? Absolutely. I don't know if he can climb past 3, because last year he was 2nd. I think people kind of forget that. So it is a tougher climb back, but I think he can get into the top 4, maybe 3. But top 4 probably feels like the ceiling for me.
Yeah, I would agree there. I can't think of another set of younger safeties. Certainly not this past class.
No, Branch is pretty much it. Talanoa Hufanga did tear his ACL last year, so he could come back. That's pretty much it. I like Jalen Petre. I like Andre Cisco. You have like the Bears guys, Jaquan Brisker. But that's really much it in terms of like young guys that can kind of make that jump.
Yeah, I think Derwin, even with just similar play, 6 in the top 10 next year, kind of by default.
Yeah, his reputation around the league is very strong for sure. All right. So again, no interior defensive linemen, no linebackers, although we feel very strongly that Junior Colson could make that jump if everything kind of comes together. Do you think Asante cracks like receiving votes for cornerbacks tomorrow?
Oh man, I would have to look at the 2023 list to see what kind of players made that grouping, because the tight ends, pretty much everyone, well, except Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst, made it. Corners last year, I'd be curious who made that list. I don't know. So Zont's not the true, he was never the true CB1, so that'll kind of knock him down.
Yeah.
But the interceptions are real. And the interceptions and passes broken up are a real thing.
Yeah.
So maybe.
So I can read you the list.
Yeah, sure.
Cornerback play is definitely very fluid in terms of like how people view them. So I think the top is going to be the top again. So you have Pat Surtain as at 1 was last year. Sauce Gardner was 2. Jalen Ramsey 3. Kind of expect him to be lower than that. Jerry Alexander 4. Darius Slay 5. Marlon Humphrey 6, Marshawn Lattimore 7, Trayvon Diggs 8, Denzel Ward 9, AJ Terrell 10, and then honorable mentions Xavier Howard, who's a free agent right now, JC Horn, Tariq Woolen, who was really bad last year, Tre'Davious White, who's with the Rams now, L'Jarius Sneed, who was way too low. He'll be in the top 10 for sure. Stephon Gilmore is the first receiving votes cornerback. He is a free agent. James Bradbury, JC Jackson received votes last year. Carlton Davis, Trent McDuffie, who will be much higher this year. Jararius Ward, DJ Reed, and Tyson Campbell were the last names on the receiving votes category. I cannot believe JC Jackson received votes last year.
I'm surprised he did. Well, you know that maybe Asante can receive votes. Anything is possible. I don't know. Are any of those corners a CB2 on their team? Not that Zont would be
like heading into last season. It would have been McDuffie would have been viewed as like the CB2 on his team. Okay. James Bradbury, Stephon Gilmore, DJ Reed. So it does kind of seem like the receiving votes category is like the CB2. Xavier Howard was the first honorable mention. He would have been viewed as the CB2 on his team with the Dolphins with the Jalen Ramsey acquisition. So it doesn't seem like you can be a CB2 on your team and crack the top 10, but you could certainly be in the kind of receiving votes category.
I could see someone getting him a vote. But I think last year with Witherspoon, I guess Gonzalez didn't finish the season, but I could maybe see him getting a vote. Joey Porter Jr., maybe even Banks. Like, I think those guys will kind of start to fill out that receiving votes category.
Yeah.
So I will say that he does get a vote, but the Chargers are pretty omitted from these selections, from these lists so far. So
yeah,
but I'll say he gets like a vote.
So he'd be in the receiving votes category.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's in the cards, but you know, cornerback play it's a lot of statistics, you know, who's playing big in big games. So I think the top 10 is going to shift around a lot. Like I think Trent McDuffie, L'Jarius Sneed will be much higher. You mentioned some of the younger guys that could be in this group too. JC Horn, you know, he was mostly healthy last year. Does he get into the top 10? You know, this list could change quite a lot. Huh?
Who was the Cowboys corner last year with the pick sixes?
Deron Bland. It's a good call out.
He even in it?
No, he did not make this list last year.
Okay.
So I would imagine he does make the list. Not a lot of slot corners. I don't think any slot corners outside of McDuffie technically made this list.
Right. Yeah. That's it. Zont gets one. And yeah.
All right. We'll see what happens there. And yeah, do not expect any wide receivers to get votes this year. But they were all up in Eugene this weekend and had a great time at Justin Herbert's softball charity tournament. So there you go.
Good for them.
All right. Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
This roster is definitely not as good as some Chargers fans would believe. The league certainly feels that way outside of Justin Herbert, a little bit of Rashawn Slater, a little bit of Derwin, and kind of Khalil Mack. But otherwise, for the most part, it's not a great roster. So maybe don't overreact to this list and don't completely buy into this list, but try to see where the list is, these rankings are coming from. Because I think that, last week you and I did the tier rankings and we couldn't put a ton of guys in Pro Bowl or All Pro or even like solid starter with upside. And I think the league is kind of reflecting that in these votes as well. I disagree and agree with some of them, but overall we have to understand that this is it has depth, but there's not a whole lot of star power, which is maybe a bit different than years past.
Yeah. And I think we are projecting some growth from some players, expecting some bounce backs from some players. But this is reflective of the Chargers being 5-11 or 5-12 or whatever it was last season and ending the season like a dumpster fire. So unfortunately, a lot of this is just kind of based off of who wins games. So right or wrong, that's kind of where we're at in today's landscape. All right, guys, that's going to do it for us tonight. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. The chat has been fun tonight. Did not get to a ton of questions, but we will throughout the rest of the show. Quick shout out to Tyler's mom, Andrea Schoon, Mama Schoon, with the super sticker as always. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Make sure to leave a like, rating, review, comment. All that good stuff does continue to help grow the show. That's going to do it for us tonight. We'll be back tomorrow night at 6 p.m. as always. And bolts up. We'll see you then.